Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we're creating and streaming from today, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. My name is Flynn. I'm the host for today, and I'm here with a fantastic Karen Alsop. Hi, Karen. How are you doing?
Hi, Flynn. I'm doing great. How are you going?
I'm great. I'm just noticing your background with the with some of the props that I think we saw in yesterday's stream, which is super cool. I really like that.
Yeah. There's a lot going on back there, but it's all the random things that I've been gathering to build this image. So I thought I'd leave it there so people can enjoy the space that I'm in and the craziness that goes on.
It's super cool. And hi to everybody in chat as well. I think who we're seeing here, Mark from Sydney. I'm from Sydney as well. Karen, where are you from in Australia?
Melbourne.
Outside of Melbourne? Yeah, cool. Melbourne.
Yeah.
And Carlos, Mark as well. Alessandra, hello. Good to see you. Asking, is this part one or is this just one stream today? We did part one yesterday, but don't worry if you missed it. We'll do a quick little recap, and then we're going to be focusing on different pieces because Karen yesterday showed us this enormous project that she's been working on. We're just kind of jumping into a couple of different elements. So this specific stream is how to paint with light. So don't worry if you missed part one. This is kind of a self-contained thing. But I'll let Karen take us through a bit of a recap, I think, and we'll show you some stuff. What do you think?
Sounds like a plan. Absolutely. So this is the area that we're going to hone in on today and working on the sheet. But what I will take you through is just a bit of a build-up. So I'm jumping into bridge here and taking everyone through the process. So this, actually, if I go back here, for anyone that missed it, this was where it kind of all started. This is my messy plan, just throwing everything together to see where it's all going to fit. And the concept of this piece had been germinating for quite some time, but it is the fifth in my animal pun series, which is all about putting animals into an image and having them represent certain puns or idioms or sayings. And this one is the Australian sayings. So this one I wanted to put 50 Australian sayings into one big image, then be able to break it up later into 2 and into 4, which is why it's all sort of color-coded and looks like that. So I went out and photographed at Puffing Billy Menzies Creek and got all my bits and pieces together and started putting it into something that I could then take into more of a nighttime scene. So we talked about turning day into night yesterday. And so this is sort of where the piece ended up once I did some color toning and things to bring it into that nighttime look. And basically we're looking at the blues and the dark areas contrasting with the orange tungsten light. So the cinematic color scheme that I really, really love, and leaving space for everything to be put into place. And so then we see some changes there as we go. I did actually make the seat bigger there. I don't know if you noticed there. So considering that I wanted to make sure the animals were really obvious, I started off with a different train, in fact, and there's the budgie smuggler over there, and he's holding a parrot, which my husband said does not look like a budgie. So I had to bring budgies into the studio and photograph them for to make it more realistic.
There's nothing better than like significant other feedback on your work, because they get to be completely brutal. Like my wife's the same. I'll show her something. She's like, that's rubbish. You need to do that all over again. Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
Great,
exactly. No, I do trust him. I do give him the image, and he picks up on things that I missed, which is really good. And he's probably watching right now thinking, yeah. So we'll go to the next one. So I added the emu with tickets on himself and the wounded bull. He's holding a $20 note, which is called a redback. And so there's all these different elements being added in. We've got Captain Cook over here having a look, and he's got little binoculars there. And just going through next we're adding in, this bird is a bin chicken. So for anyone that's not sure, that's an ibis called a bin chicken. He's hitting the frog and toad, which means on the road. And then the lizard is drinking. He's on the terps, basically. That's a can of terps. He's flat out drinking, and he's drinking with the flies there. So just continuing like integrating multiple sayings into one animal as well, so that having 50 separate things wouldn't work, but wanting to have it so that there's some sort of story within it. And then the cat on a hot tin roof. And if I zoom up on there, actually, I'll do that at the end because that one hasn't fully loaded. But yeah, he's got burning feet there. So next one. So adding the wombat picnic, goose, sandwich short of a picnic, cat over here that's cat in pajamas. He spat the dummy, and yeah, I'm not going to go through all the whole list because it'd take me forever. But here's some hens having a hens party. Over here, some little chicks. There's a kiwi crossing the ditch. He's got a sticky beak with honey on it. And then a few more things in there. Little duck, and right to the end here, all of the different pieces there. So, over here you can see a little kiwi. That's actual real honey. I had to go and get honey from the cupboard and bring it in and wrap it around a pair of scissors, actually, because I thought the scissors would look like a beak. And then this snake, there's an ankle biter, and I put Band-Aids on the snake, but obviously did not do that in the studio. The Band-Aids were not. The snake was not in the studio.
I love it. And it's a very Australian focus, but I love that you got the Kiwi in there. Rosie from chat said hi from New Zealand. So there you go. You are represented. The Kiwi is there. There was also a question from Alessandra. So maybe you could talk about your process briefly as well. Did Karen paint this from scratch? So maybe you can answer that question just with your process of photography and digital art.
Absolutely. So I didn't paint it as such, although I actually have no problem with people calling it a painting. I think, we're painting with digital tools, but everything in this is photographic. So every single pixel I have photographed. I haven't used any AI or 3D elements or anything like that. I could, nothing wrong with that, but I haven't. So I go and I photograph all the pieces that I need. Now, I touched on it yesterday, but I've got a huge Lightroom Creative Cloud library of over 40,000 photos that I've taken, many of them on my prop camera, my Nikon Z9, some of them on my phone, but there's photos there that I can search and find what I'm after. So I refer back to images that I've collected and use that for a lot of the pieces, and then I work out what I need to photograph. So if I need to go and get some hens party materials from the party shop, then I can, go and do that. Or if I need to go down to the hot bread shop and get some bread, or go and get a snot block, I do that, and then I come back and photograph it and I eat it. Thanks.
That's a business deduction, right? Like, I need to photograph like really fancy food. Like, I'm sure my wife would be like, you need to photograph like expensive smelly cheese once a week and write it off as a business expense.
Yes. My bookkeeper has a lot of fun with the things that I put through as props. So legitimate though that it's hilarious. Yeah. So that's, the process is very much thinking about and conceptualizing what it is that I want to do, and then making it happen with photography and Photoshop. So what I've discovered is there's always a way to do something. It's just knowing the tools and knowing the workflow. So
I like that. And there's a follow-up question actually as well. How do you store all of these photos? Do you use a hard drive? Yeah, what's your storage thing? Because I know you use Bridge as well, but if you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah. So Lightroom is where I store all of the stock images. And so that's on the cloud. So I've actually got 10 terabytes available there. So all of the images are in the cloud, which means that they're accessible anywhere, and they're accessible on my phone or if I go away. So that's fantastic. I did used to carry around little hard drives and try and copy my stock across to and I was doubling up. It was a mess. I lost things. So this is a fantastic way to keep everything in one place, but also to be able to search for things as well. So I can put something into the search like rabbit. I haven't keyworded it, but it will bring up all the rabbits or anything that it thinks is a rabbit, and I can then go ahead and use it. So I would then output that as a raw file, and I would take that into Bridge and Photoshop. So Bridge is where I kind of go through and look for all the images that I've moved into here as raws. So this is my elements folder. And so they're on my hard drive. Those ones are on an external hard drive, which I back up to the cloud as well as back up to another drive. And then, and then the big files here. So this is a massive file. And that's saved and backed up as well. But it also has smart linked objects in there as well. So that means that this sheep that we're going to be working on today, the sheep itself is a smart linked object. It's a large document file object or image, and it's saved outside of that original file. So it's saving me space. So if I'm in Bridge here, just to go over that, so under Straya, which is the name of the actual artwork, there is smart object link files. So these are all the smart objects and the smart linked files that are within my artwork. And so they need to all be backed up as well and saved, because if I lose them, then the whole file won't work. There'd be broken links in the original. So
yeah, and you've got like maximize. Yeah, it's great. Like it's so interesting how you would manage like 40,000 files and navigate it through, but also you want to keep things efficient, right? So we touched on that in probably a little bit more detail yesterday. That was a great overview to kind of understand link smart objects as well. We checked out. So if you don't know what they are, you can jump back and check that one out, because I think that's a very good thing, whether you're working with large file format or you're finding that Photoshop's slow because you're trying to do so much in a single file. Very useful thing to wrap your head around, and it's actually very easy to do.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this file, I don't even know, I haven't even counted the layers. It's so ridiculous. I said yesterday it was it's the biggest image that, I've ever created. And so I wouldn't have been able to make it function if everything was smart objects within this. Smart linked objects, the way to go for something like this.
There you go.
Yep. All right, so shall we move on to the sheep itself? And what we're talking about is painting with light. So I'm going to take you through back to the starting point of this sheep, and I'm going to open up this raw file. This is the original sheep. Now, what I love about this is that it's they're ready to go. Like, it's actually posed as though it's sitting on a chair. So what I do when I'm photographing animals quite often is I'll photograph all the different angles, because I know that I'm going to kind of want to change them into more of a human-like form, so anthropomorphize them. But when I can, if the animal's already in the right position, then it really saves me work, and it also makes it more realistic. So this worked really well. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that sheep sitting there having a snot block. So I started with the sheep. And so it's not, I photographed it in low light. It's quite grainy, but you can get away with that when you're putting a composite together and you're kind of doing all of the additional work in Photoshop as well. Okay, so I'm not going to save that. That is fine. And I'll go back in here. So now this first step was just to actually get rid of the hands. So all I've done there is used a mixture of content aware fill. Actually, no, I haven't. I have used the healing brush and I've used the stamp tool on this. Now, because I know that, because this is a blank layer that's above the other layer here. And I always work non-destructively, so I don't want to rasterize this, because when you try and content aware fill, it asks you if you want to flatten the file. You can't do it on that file. So if I was content aware filling, I would duplicate this layer and I would just do it on that bit. But what you can do is you can create a blank layer, and then you can go to one of your tools. So if you want to do healing brush for a start, spot healing brush, and you can have it set to sample all layers. So that means that when I do that, it's pulling from the sheep's fur and very, very quickly getting rid of the hands. And I can turn it off and on. So that, I highly recommend that workflow, because it means that you can always go back, you can always fix things, and you can then package it up. So what I've done there at this point in my workflow is I've saved that as a smart object. So when I go into this file here, which is the smart object, once I've placed him into the scene,
looks like he's falling. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. I've got him all contained in the smart object, and it means that I can puppet warp him. So that was the original, yeah? And that was after the puppet warp. So if I click on the puppet warp and I show the mesh, I love puppet warp. Puppet warp is something that I use all the time because I need to change how these animals are and where they're sitting and what they're doing. So I can have a pin and it's just like doing a puppet. It's so cool. You know, you can really go crazy with it, but you don't want to go too far that it looks not right. One quick little workflow thing that I recommend is expand the edge when you're puppet warping. Default will be 2. So I normally push it up a bit so that the edge is a bit further out. And the reason I do that is because it can create some jagged edges if you don't. So just expand it out a little bit so that it protects the edges of your image. And then when you're ready to go, I'll just click on, turn that one back on. Okay, so I'll just cancel that and I'll click over here. Then I package that up again. It sounds, I was saying yesterday, it's like those babushka doll things where, you know, I'm putting it within, but I like to keep everything like that so that I can control what I'm doing. So my next step after I've puppet warped is, I want an arm up that is going to hold the snot block. And for anyone that's wondering about a snot block, I
was going to ask what a snot block is, and then you said you ate it, and I thought I'd leave
Sydney, and I don't know if you've heard of a snot block.
No.
I thought it was well known. Like, I thought it was just everyone in Australia knows what a snot block is. Apparently not. Apparently it's more of a eastern suburbs Melbourne thing. I didn't realise that because that's where I'm from. But it is it's a slice it's a vanilla slice. So that's its official name, full of custard, and it's got icing on the top, and it's very, very tasty. Thanks to Lisa, my baker.
So I know what it is, but yeah, I've never heard that terminology before. There you go.
Now you can call it that. Yeah, so I needed the arm to hold the snot block. So what we've got through here, I separated out the arm just by copying the arm section. And if I turn all these off here, so you can see that's the original arm. Done a little bit of shading already there. So the lighting, I've started doing some extra shading, knowing that this sheep is going to have more light around the edge, and there's going to be shadow on the inside. So I've added that. And this layer here, I'm going to go through it more when we're within the file, but this layer here is soft light mode, and it's whites and blacks. So it's basically dodging and burning and lifting the light in some areas and darkening it off in some areas. So my process is generally not to try and do all of the shading and lighting in one layer, but gradually build. I find that it makes it more realistic, it gives you more control, and it's like painting. It is like painting, just building up on those strokes. So then this one here is covering up the arm because I'm going to move it. So again, just using healing brush. And this is done after. This is the shadow of the arm. So there we've got the arm. So the original without the puppet warp is like that. And I've done some masking on there as well. So if I turn that off, it's just this straight arm. But then I want it obviously to actually be bent. So I'll turn on the puppet warp. So now it would look like, okay, yeah, now that sheep can actually hold the snot block. It's ready to go. Yeah. And so then I package that up again and bring it into my scene so that I can do all the rest of the work with everything else visible around. So the light source is visible, or the light sources. So if I look at there, there's some light coming from there, light from the lantern, light from up there. And I can then work with the reference of where should my light be coming from.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to turn all these off. So now you can kind of see what it looks like without the extra lighting that I'm going to go through.
Very cool.
text. Yeah.
And I'm just going to interrupt because I think you are about to kind of answer this question because you just turn off some of the layers that I think approach this. Rob had a great question yesterday that I missed. I'm very sorry, Rob. And it's I'm very pleased that you're back to ask it again and remind us because it was a really great question. Rob says, I would love to hear about how Karen color corrects all the different elements to the scene. Although that might be about to be answered with the sheep. So it might be, but yes, I would. It's a great question because if I took lots of different photos and I put it all together, it would not look cohesive. So that's Rob's question, and thanks for it.
That is really, really good question. And I like the way he asked it too, because it was about all the elements in the scene. So, you know, you could look at something like this and go, oh, it'll be right. I'll just put something over the top at the end.
Right.
You know, I'll put a color lookup table over the top, but that's not going to work because we looked at this yesterday. If I just go back into Bridge, I want to sort of show the whole thing. There's a lot of variation in this image. There's a lot of blues and dark areas right at the back here. There's the tungsten light. Now all this area is a bit warmer. And so the animals that are close to the front are a bit more contrasty and they're a bit warmer. And the animals that are further towards the back, they've got a more blue tone to them. So working on each and every element individually is important, but starting with the color tone and knowing where you're going from there. So I have a few techniques to that. If I go back into Photoshop, I think I need to get out of there and back in here. So one of the things that you probably saw me turn off with the sheep was a blue tone. So if I turn that one back on, that makes a huge difference. Now, it does. The sheep's not completely blue, but it just brings the tonal range that is in the scene into it. So if I turn that off, slight delay there, but yeah, that's the original sheep, bit yellow. Okay, and back on. And so what that one is, it's really, that one's just a solid color layer. So it's that blue. It's a similar blue to what's around there. I often might just use the eyedropper and pull it from.
I was going to ask, do you just color pick the blue until it feels right?
Yeah, and then just maybe even move it around a little bit if I need to. So the great thing about, you know, having it as a color adjustment layer, you can change it on the fly. So if it's not right, you can look at it, you can see. I'm going to cancel that. So that works, but then the actual blending mode is important as well. So if I turn it to normal, sorry, I've got a slight lag, but I'll keep talking as I go. So that's what it looks normal. So which means it's got an opacity on it at 37%, but that's a solid color. So it needs to be color blending mode, which is down the bottom there. And that's going to give you it's going to bring the color out, but not actually affect the contrast or anything else. It's only going to affect the color. Another technique that I might use is a color lat or a color lookup table. I haven't done it on here, but I will demonstrate it. So if I go to my adjustments, color lookup, click on that. So this will actually create a new one. Now there's a whole bunch of built-in color lookup tables in Photoshop. And some of the ones that I might use in something like this would be night from day, moonlight, or foggy night. They all change it to more of the blues. So if I click on night from day, that's where it starts. Now that is the cool thing about color lookup tables is that they're like a combination of things. They're a combination of levels and curves and blending modes, everything all bundled together and preset. But you can then take something like that and you can, again, change it to color mode if you wanted to do that and just have it affecting the color. You can change the opacity. So you can do a whole lot of things with the color lookup tables. I didn't realize you could add like an adjustment layer on top of the color lookup. That's really interesting. Yeah. So all of these adjustments, you just keep adding them and clipping them. So I think people can probably see this little arrow here. This arrow means that adjustment is clipped to just the sheep. So if I move that color lookup table one to the top, and then I release the clipping mask, so right click, release clipping mask, what's going to happen? It applies to everything that's underneath it. Whereas clipping, so this is my method, is like bring everything into one. So get the sheep into one piece, like one puzzle piece, and then do the adjustments, but clip it to the sheep. So it's still non-destructive editing. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I'll turn that off. Yep. Let me know if you have any questions, because I'm just stepping through and probably talking a bit fast. But
no, that was great. But yeah, of course, chat. Let us know if you want anything more clarified. But that definitely answered the question. That's so great. So you don't do any of the color changes or anything in the original edit. Obviously, you have to bring everything in, the composition and kind of do that, I guess, towards the end. Do you do it as you go for each element, like as you're kind of putting them in? Yeah, you do, rather than putting everything in.
Yeah, everything. So every element, and this is something I've learnt, and it's something I've learnt through teaching as well, because the tendency could be, let's get all those elements in, see if they fit, and then you start working on them, because there's so much there you forget. And you kind of, it feels overwhelming. So this is my method, and it's because I'm adding so many things into it that if I do all of my adjustments and everything on each individual element as I'm bringing it in, then I can see, oops, I'll turn off the color lookup. That's terrible, that one. I can see if it's working, and it actually then leads me to the next. Okay, I know what my shadows and lighting need to be on the next one, because it's in a similar spot to the last one. And so it kind of creates that consistency. So this sheep was one of my earlier additions. And so from that, I've been able to go, okay, similar lighting to the wombat, but the wombat will have more light on this side and a little less light on this side.
Right.
So I'll turn off these ones again and go through the lighting. So already you saw in the previous steps, or in the before the sheep was even in the scene, there was a little bit of levels adjustment and everything. And yesterday we did also touch on, before I bring something in, I might adjust the white balance in RAW as well. I don't always, so I don't think I did with this sheep, because he was really, really yellow. But I've been able to, because he's not multicolored. So this sort of element that's not multicolored, you can really tone in Photoshop and have full control.
Right.
If it's something that's got a lot of different colors to it, you kind of want to take that a little more carefully, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if it was, someone was wearing a colorful dress or something like that, you might have to sort of individually, you might have a different approach. Whereas the sheep is originally white, so it's the color is going to be a bit more consistent. That's coming from the original photo. So
exactly right.
Cool.
All right, so I'm going to turn on this first one here. So he's got his basic shading there, but he needs a little more sculpting and shading and shadow. So turn that. Did that do anything then? Yeah, that did. So turn it back on. Okay, so what's happened there is I've brightened up his stomach area down here. So I'm looking at, where is the light falling? And I'm using that as my way of relighting. So I'm actually going to show you this, and then I'm going to redo it in real time. So I'm looking at, where is the light coming from? Where is it being blocked? So there's light being blocked underneath his arm, underneath his head. There's light coming from the train, so he needs a bit more light over here. Needs a bit more light on his leg, because that's coming straight from over here as well. So I'm analyzing the scene that I've created, and I'm working on adding the light to match that. And I've created, I'm going to turn this one on as well. So this is sort of that next step one. This is overlay mode, whereas the other one was soft light. Big difference with the blending modes is that soft light's a bit more subtle. Overlay mode is a bit heavier, and overlay mode works really well for rim lighting, because it really brightens up certain areas. And so I've used overlay mode and added some sculpting. So if I turn that off, and I turn it back on, so darkened up a little bit more down here. So just building it up. And as I said before, it's better to do it this way than to try and do it all in one layer, because then you can reshape and remold it until it starts to look how you want it. So I'm going to show everyone how I do that by turning these layers off. I'll leave the blue on for the tone because that one's just sort of over the top of everything. And I'm going to create a new layer. So that automatically clipped to my sheet because it's underneath the other one that's clipped. So it's already clipped. I'm going to go soft light mode and use black and white and I'll zoom up a bit more. So black and white brush. I would, at this point, I want a bit of control. I don't want it to be super soft. So I'd sort of bring it down to around the quarter-way mark. And I might also turn the flow down. I usually use flow rather than opacity. It's very similar, but the flow has, for me, a little more of a natural build up and the opacity has more of an overlapping. So I use flow to bring down the flow of my brush. I could use pressure sensitivity. I'm using a Wacom tablet, but for this sort of thing, for the most part, I'm wanting a brush that's quite broad that I can just sort of paint in and build up. So I'm going to use black and white, and I'm going to even turn that flow down more, I think, because that's coming up a bit dark. The other good thing about the adjustment layer, though, is that you can do it and then you can adjust the opacity of the layer itself afterwards.
Right.
But I'm going to bring in some darker areas here. So I'll do it more than I normally would so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm thinking, okay, so the light's coming down from up there. So I don't want to darken up any areas, you know, around here, around the top of the sheep there, maybe a little under the hand. I'm going to bring that flow down a bit more.
I could ask a question that's come in from chat that I think is appropriate for this. So during this process, why do you do it this way rather than not dodge and burn?
This is pretty much my version of dodge and burn. So right. There's a heap of different ways you can dodge and burn. You can use the dodge and burn tool. You can use black and white and use a grey layer so that you can see it. I just do it this way. So it is basically the same as dodging and burning, but it's sort of shading at the same time. Sometimes I use a soft light blending mode and color so that I can boost color. If I was wanting to bring out the browns on the possum here, then I might use soft light blending mode and sort of just paint in a bit more brown. So there's you can kind of merge those methods a bit more. Another thing that I might do for the sheep instead of soft light mode is also a levels adjustment layer. So if I go into levels and I pull the white slider all down to about there. So I want to see a bit of the detail, but still be quite dark. You can also adjust the color of the levels adjustment layer, but because it's sitting underneath the blue tone, I've got control over that color already. So if this was sitting above the blue tone, that's the difference that it makes. So the toning also helps to adjust the shadow toning as well, which is very good option. And then I would invert this levels adjustment layer, so Command I, and then very similar to the soft light, but I'd be painting in shadow. So using X to switch between black and white. I'll turn up the flow. So painting in the shadow with a levels adjustment layer rather than soft light. So it gives you a different look. Maybe not as contrasty, but I'd use all of these throughout. So this is what I'm saying, like multiple layers, building up. Okay, what do I want to do here? So let's just make this a bit darker underneath. And I'm going more than what I would, so I can then turn the opacity down.
Right.
Turn that flow down so I can build up on it. A bit of darkness under here. So adding the shadows first is probably the way I tend to go, and then adding the rim light afterwards and the extra lighting effects. Got to think too about where things are, like what's blocking light, and this is sort of a separate process, but as soon as I add something like a snot block, you might want to add a bit more shadow underneath that. So thinking about where it's being blocked and where it's coming through. So if I just, move that around, move that slider around until I'm feeling comfortable. And then I would add to it. So, in this case, I had, that's sort of the first level. And then if we do overlay, now what I might do, so I don't want to spend too long on the shading. I'm going to jump into the rim light and the lighting part of it now. So this won't look as good as my final because I'm spending less time on it, but it will give you an idea of how it works. So if I create another blank layer, I turn it on to overlay mode, and then I could use white, which works pretty well, and just paint in the very edge of the sheep where I'm thinking, there's going to be extra light coming through, bit of extra light here. So when I'm doing it, I won't just do it on the edge. There might be a bit of light on the edge of that ear. There might be a bit more broad light on the top there. So it's building it up rather than just big, broad strokes in different places, thinking, okay, where is the light dropping onto the sheep and building it up?
The rim light is not just a halo effect. You're thinking about each shape, and that was really interesting. Like thinking about rim light, but you're also thinking about the broad, like feathered across the top of the head, which will give you that extra bit of depth.
That's right. And again, I do this in multiple layers. So, one layer might be that more precise, very much just the rim light, and then another layer might be more that broader light. But doing it, because I have created a whole lot of actions, and the actions make it easy for people to add rim light and shadows and shading and all of that, but that's just the start. That can't be that end point. You really do need to be analysing that object that you're putting in and figuring out where is the light falling and where is it blocked. And you can learn from just looking at things around you and shadows and how you put your arm up and your hand in front of things and how the shadow's falling and how is the light falling on things, and you just grow in that over time until it becomes a little bit more of a natural sort of enjoyable process rather than too much of a stressful process. So that's primarily what I do. So the main three things, or the main three things that I would use is levels adjustment, overlay mode, soft light mode. So if I want to turn back on my original ones here, I think it's those ones. Yeah. And also the same thing goes for the shadows underneath. So building it up. So you can see the sheep is just floating at the moment. So this shadow, if I turn that on, it softens off as it goes over here. It's darker underneath the sheep. It's following how would the light fall with that leg being up. So again, shadows don't need to be, if I go down here, see these shadows on the wombat, it's the same thing. The closer it is to the animal, the darker it is and the sharper it is, and the further it moves away, the softer it is. And doing that using actions takes you only so far, but then building it up and using your brush and just adding to it really starts to look realistic. And I said it before that, in this image, there's a lot going on, and in some cases, the light might be a bit brighter than what it really would be in reality, but I think as long as it doesn't jar people, as long as it's people looking at it and go, oh, wow, that looks amazing, and not, oh, what's going wrong, then, right. It really can work, regardless of it.
What did you say yesterday? Was it sell the fake? I think.
Yes.
Is that right?
That's Joel Grimes. Yep. Right. Yep. Joel Grimes has said it. And I'm like, yes, that is exactly right. Sell the fake. Because you can spend forever trying to get something completely realistic and accurate. But in my case, if I did that, and I talked about the chickens yesterday, they would probably be a bit more in the dark, they wouldn't be standing out, and in fact then they wouldn't be telling the story that I want them to tell.
Right.
So it is a balance. I often enter awards and the judges are going to look very carefully and closely at every single little thing, and quite often they'll be looking for realism. But yeah, I've found it's a bit of a balance between those two things.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask this question. We might get to it later, but I'll ask it now because I think it's another great question. The dust in the scene really helps to create the atmosphere to bring it all together. Could you talk us through that process? So I don't know if you're going to get to that later or anything like that, but I'm also very interested, and I think it's another great question. Good job today, everybody. You guys are asking some excellent questions.
That is a great question. Yeah, no, I was planning to talk about it at some stage, so I will talk about it now. This layer here, the atmosphere, there's a bit of dust and everything here, and it's built up throughout. So there's atmosphere in the foreground, there's atmosphere further back and right at the back. And one of the things that I have done, I've got a spinning ball, but I'll click on it in a second, is I've captured a whole lot of atmospheric things that I've put into a library, which I always have access to in Photoshop. Now, I've actually got this in my Story Art Education site as well, so other people can get access to this, but I use this all the time myself because I've photographed it for this purpose. This will add atmosphere. So there's a bunch of atmosphere that I've used, this sort of the rain, the coloured rain over here. This one here is a favourite. So the dust, and I've got a few different dust particles. I can just drag that in over here. And you can see what it looks like that.
Is this something that you've photographed?
Yeah.
Or scanned in?
Yeah,
Okay,
I threw dirt. Yeah. I had someone throw dirt up into the air, black backdrop, light, and just capture it. So it's as easy as that. Light it more from the back than the front. I've got a dense velvety black background, so it sucks in the light, and then I just photograph it and then color it. So
it's actually thrown, so that's in front of
it's just dirt from the garden
kind of thing. I love that. It's interesting, isn't it? So like you wouldn't photograph it flat because it would sit in a different way. It wouldn't have the motion that you might want. Is that?
It wouldn't have the motion, and it wouldn't have the light reflecting off it as well. Right. So throwing things in the air, or the same thing with smoke. There's just I had to remove my smoke alarm from the studio because I bring in like
don't
sticks.
Try this at home, ladies and gentlemen.
You got to do what you got to do. But I bring in sticks and things. I might put them in a pot, fireproof kind of pot, and then light them and let the smoke drift up, or a kettle and just have that boiling in front of the light.
Great. That's good.
Yeah.
Kettle's smart. I like that.
There's just all different ways of doing it. So and then having lights. So these ones here, I can't drag that in at the moment, but that's like a really strong light that is shining, and then just adding the different dust and things in front of it. I've also got a thing called Atmosphere in a Can. So you can buy it. It's a spray. You could use hairspray and everything as well. But so Atmosphere in a Can. And so you can spray it, and then it shows up when you're lighting in front of black, and then you photograph that.
Right.
So it's well worth even just collecting your own sort of set of stock for this sort of thing, because as I said, I use it all the time. And so this one here, it's photographed in front of black, because then you can go into your blending modes. And if you go down to this section here, which is lighten, screen, color dodge, etc. So most of the time I'd use screen, and sometimes I use color dodge. So you can see the difference that it makes. Screen has a bit more of the in-between colors, the dense. Color dodge is really only the bright highlight one. So it gives a different look. But I would use that, and then I'd sort of put it where I want and make it bigger or smaller or whatever it is. And then, you can then use your opacity. You can mask it in, mask it out. So if I wanted to more do sort of like rays coming from this light, I'd click on the mask and I'd go get my brush. I might even make it pressure sensitive. Every time I click up them, the zoom controller comes on top of my icons, which makes it hard.
Oh yeah, we can't see it on this side, but yes, I know what you
mean.
mean.
Yeah, you can't see it. Yeah. It's all right. I've moved it to the other screen.
Yeah.
I'm all good. So I can go pressure sensitive brush and turn the flow up and turn my brush, make it bigger. I'll invert the mask so you can't see it. And what I'm doing here is if I click softly and then I hold down shift and I click, I'll have to do it when I'm on white. So I'll do that again. Click and then shift, and then I'm going to hit it really hard onto the Wacom tablet.
Wow, cool.
It does, like these rays. And if I kind of just paint that so I can demonstrate what I just did, click, shift, click. So it creates like because I've pressed harder on that second click. Shift makes it
with
straight.
The pressure sensitivity on. Okay, yeah. And so you've given that, very cool. That's a neat trick. I like that.
It is a neat trick.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all sorts of things like that. And then of course you can do other things like feathering your mask, make a sort of a softer edge, whatever it is that you want to do. So I would spread atmosphere through, and I just do it subtly, bit by bit, adding it particularly around the light and those areas. The colored rain sort of, so it's not just a solid blue sky, but there's something going on in the background. And that was just actually a spray bottle. So that one there is up here. Spray bottle of water sprayed into the air and then captured, and that creates a really nice texture. So anything that's shot on black and that comes up white, you can do. The same thing, you could do the opposite and use different blending modes with something that's shot black on white. But most of the time, white on black for atmosphere.
Amazing.
So I'll get rid of that, turn that one off. Cool. So the next thing I wanted to jump into is over here. I thought it might be interesting to go into this one here, which is one of the last ones that I created. And it's the cow goat.
Cow goat.
Click on here. Yeah. Now I need it. So do you know what that saying might be?
I'm trying to think of it. Cow goat. I'm thinking like wolf in sheep's clothing, but it's not that. Cow
but
goat.
it's kind of, come from that concept, but there's a reason it's a goat.
Chat, help me out.
Not so much a reason there's a cow.
Let's before you
acting that. Oh no! Okay. All right, I already said the first bit.
Yeah,
I didn't say the last bit.
I was going to say give chat a chance, but yeah.
No. Oh, okay. I'll just say what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. You just
so acting the goat. Acting the goat. Yeah. So acting the goat. I thought, how am I going to represent acting the goat? Well. Yeah, what if another animal is dressed as a goat? So I had a lot of fun with this one. I'm going to open that up. And I'm going to show you one of the big things that I needed to consider with this one, because I'm putting a goat on top of a cow, is, and I'm going through my layers here, backtracking through. I needed to look at the shadows that are underneath the goat as it joins onto the cow. So I've packaged this one up really well. Okay, so here we are. So here's the goat on top of the cow. And if I turn that off, and so you can see that that's the goat, and I'll turn all of this off as well. And there's this zip. So the zip, that wasn't just an idea. I love sharing my progress with people, because every now and again I'll be talking about how am I going to do this, and they'll say something. I'll go, yes, that's brilliant. So I was just picking up my daughter from a friend's house, and the friend's mum was like, what, I had a zip? And I thought, yes, why not? So I photographed the side of my camera bag and joined it all together, and I used Puppet Warp to just kind of put it in the direction that I wanted. And so I've got this zip. So that was the last thing to put on it. So so we're starting with the cow. Even the cow's puppet warped, because the cow was on a hill. I still wanted to use the cow. He was super cute. So
it's a very cute cow.
Puppet warped him.
Yeah.
And then that's the shadow that is underneath the costume. So I won't turn that one on. Turn this on. So a bit of lighting, the light that's coming through onto the cow's nose. There we go. So without the shadow, maybe I'll turn that one off. Without the shadow there, it looks quite odd. Definitely looks cut out. I'll put the zip on there, turn the zip on. So it's really important to think about, okay, where would the shadow fit underneath? So if I turn that back on, and this one. So I'm going to rework that quickly. Turn that one off. So I'm just going to create another levels adjustment layer. Yeah, and levels. You could use curves as well, and there's sort of nothing wrong with that. This is just my preferred method, and I see this slider as taking the light out of the scene. So I pull that down. If you want it to be a bit denser, I might sometimes turn that onto multiply blending mode, so it makes that shadow a bit darker, but I still can see some of the detail. So I haven't pulled it fully down to black. So a shadow still has a little bit of detail there. And then invert, Command I, and then it's that same principle of where would the light fall and where would it not. So I'll turn off pressure sensitivity, turn down my flow, change the brush hardness is probably fine, and just building it up. So looking at, okay, the closest section would be darker. So close to the edge would be, so I'm using also, I've actually got a loop deck, so I can change the size of my tool using that, or you could use your little cursors as well. So just making the brush bigger and smaller as I go using that. Yeah.
Loop deck, so, for those that don't know, it's like an external kind of peripheral device that you can program for kind of any key function, right? So you could,
that's right,
the common keys that you use all the time, it's on its own little sort of mini keyboard. Yeah,
I can probably lift it it's upside down because it's plugged in, but yeah. So it's got all the knobs in there. Yeah, you can just really customize and have all those shortcuts and not need to use a keyboard, which is fantastic. Cool. Okay, so yeah, just building it up, and then darker in this section here, but it's raised, so it softens off. So you think about where is this sitting closer to the cow, and where is this sort of needing to soften off. So something lifts, or a piece of material is lifting up, then it's going to have a softer shadow in that section. It's not just going to be a line around following it. And it's the same thing here. There might be sort of more of a softer shadow down here because it's still being blocked. But there still might be a little bit of light coming from the side there. So you might not want your shadow to go all the way to the edge of the cow. You still need to allow that light to crack through from over here. And so you just build it up. And at this point, I'd probably then do another one. So another levels adjustment layer. Bring it down again. And that way I can build it up in pieces and darken up some of these areas, and yeah, just make it more realistic.
Yeah, I love the way that you build it up in different levels, and then you can kind of tweak them, and I assume you could tweak the opacity down the track as well, and everything, rather than kind of trying to do it and then realizing I've gone too far, let's do that again. So it's just slowly building up until you get it pretty close, and then you can sort of tweak things. Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hey, we are almost out of time. We've only got about 2 minutes left. It's gone really fast today, but wow, we've covered a lot.
Yeah. Well, I'm jumping back into this screen. Are there any questions from anyone in the last couple of minutes?
There was one more question, so I think we'll finish on it. The question was around what motivated you to do this type of work, basically around photography and design and blending those two together.
Yeah, that's a good question to end on. Yeah, so I was a wedding and portrait photographer, and I love doing that. And I always sort of delved into this Photoshop stuff. I tried a few crazy things, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So it was when my kids were very little and we decided weddings weren't the thing that we could do anymore, that I decided to try a new niche. And started creating and started entering competitions and got some really great results. And it was sort of from there that boosted my confidence, I think. And I realized, I just want to be doing this all the time. I absolutely love it. And so being able to do it for commercial projects and for clients and for my own artworks that I sell, and for the Heart Project, which is our charity work where we are able to do this for families and kids in need, take them out of their physical limitations and put them into a magical scene is just absolutely amazing. So it's awesome.
Absolutely. And there's links to all of Karen's socials and website and all that sort of stuff. Definitely check out the Heart Project. I mean, you've done some stuff with Adobe on that. It's incredible. That's a whole nother, we could talk about that in a whole nother stream, but we are out of time today. If you missed the previous stream, go and check that out. If you're watching on demand, everything's available on YouTube and Behance. And Karen, thank you so much for hanging out with us. I always learn so much when you come on. So really appreciate you and your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Flynn. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you next week on Adobe Live. Thanks everybody in chat. We'll catch you next time. Bye.